So now we have created the base of our terrain. Let's add some details and some features to our terrain. So we'll click on the terrain. First we'll look at the terrain collider here. It's asking to create tree colliders. Let's add some trees. Now first I'm going to demonstrate something about trees, and then I'm going to step back to this point, and then we're going to work with trees some more. So for now, I'm just going to add a tree. Go to my terrain assets. I'll just pick on the thin tree. It hasn't got great leaves, has it? Let's pick on the sycamore. Alright, so if I add the tree, so we now have a tree to our terrain. Now there is another handy tool here where we can mass place trees. And here we set a value, how many trees in total. Let's bring that down a little bit and hit place. And we can see what's happened to our scene. What trees have been placed. Alright. This is completely random. And there's some trees you may not like the position of. So you can unpaint trees by holding the shift and then clicking to unpaint. So hold shift to unpaint. Alright, change the brush size. Start to pick on individual trees. And shift to unpaint. Okay. Now, to what I was going to demonstrate with trees. First of all, we're going to need our character controller. It's going to run around in the world. So we can use this in our example. So, assets, import package, character controller. Okay, I will import everything. If you see my other videos, there is a fix to the third person controller. As we see what it comes in, there is a warning on one of the scripts on the third person controller. Double click that warning. It takes us to this line. We'll quickly have a look. It's a conditional, and it looks like we're looking for two conditions. We're looking for this condition, we're looking for this condition. Now, it's safe to assume we're looking for an OR here. So if we look, we're looking for a left shift or a right shift. Okay, so save that out. Finish with that. Go back to Unity. After it compiles, the warning has disappeared, so that's fixed. Alright, we're not using that, but there you go. So let's drag in our first person controller. Let's try and put it somewhere in our scene. There we go, that looks pretty good. Okay. I'm going to zoom in on him just to make sure he's not, the collider is not penetrating the terrain. See, it's penetrating the terrain there, so let's just bring him up. So a flat area to start. There is two right here. So just set our character, a first person controller, into position. Now if we look, we can see the gizmo drawing there for the camera. Of course, with the first person controller, we see from the perspective of that controller. So the main camera is in the first person controller. So delete the default scene camera. Now we have the one camera. See, our scene is a little dark. So while we're here, create a directional light. Okay. Now we've built that, let's just save this scene. Save scene as. And we're testing the terrain. Just save that in our scenes folder. Let's give it a play and run around. Okay, so from this perspective, we can have a look at our textures. And have a look at our terrain in general. So what's happening. Now let's check out what's happening with the trees. I'll walk up to a tree, and I'll walk through a tree. Okay, let's stop that right there. Now, hang on, we said the terrain, create tree colliders. But we walked through a tree. Now we have to investigate this, so let's create a new scene. Now the tree I used, we go to the terrain assets, was a thin tree. No, it wasn't, because we didn't like the leaves. I've already forgotten the tree we used. let's go to our terrain. Not that one. Okay, let's go back to our scene. So I've completely forgotten the tree that I used. Terrain, tree, the sycamore. Okay, so let's click on that. Edit trees, edit tree, sycamore. There it is there. So that's the tree I used. Let's start again. Create a new scene. Bring in the sycamore we were just looking at. Now, if we look at all the components on this sycamore game object, we'll see we don't actually have a collider. Okay, and therein lies the problem with all trees and people being able to walk through trees. It's because the tree doesn't actually have a collider. So the terrain can't generate a collider for this tree. So let's add a collider now. So we go component, physics, capture collider. As you see, now we have a collider encapsulating our whole tree. Now that scale is a bit massive. We don't want to be walking out here and bumping into the tree. So let's find our capture collider. Here's our capture collider. We can set the radius. Let's see what happens there. There we go. We're going to thin that tree out. Now, unless you can jump quite high, you probably don't need that higher collider. So let's even bring the height down. Okay. Now, because that capsule is off the ground, the collider, let's just bring it down in the wire. So there we go. So that's how you fix your trees, by adding colliders to the tree. Now we're working with a prefab here. So that's a model. So I've just created a prefab of a tree with a collider. So let's make a new folder. Underscore prefabs. This is what I'm creating. Let's create a subfolder there, because this is going to be for trees. More specifically, trees with colliders. Okay, so we grab the tree that we've just added our collider to, drag it and drop it into the folder. So now we've created our first tree with a collider. Let's have a look at some other trees we want to bring in. Terrain assets, trees. Okay. We could probably use that, so let's drag that in. And again, looking at the components, there is no capsule collider or any collider associated with this tree. So again, component, physics, capsule collider. Bring in the radius. Don't need so much height. And now we can see that the trunk is slightly offset there, so where are we working? Somewhere around the X. So we can bring the X down a little bit. Let's find the Z. The Z is looking quite good. No, wrong angle. There's our Z, so click on each one of these handles, so we're now looking on this X. There we go. Capture collider for our next tree. So let's add that to our prefabs trees folder. Okay, so there's just two trees, but you get the idea. If you want to have a tree that you can interact with and bump into, there's a lot of colliders to add there. I missed that one. Okay, so you have a tree that you want to bump into. So you add a capsule collider. And then resize that capture collider. Until the capture collider will ensure that you do collide with the tree branch. That's a bit of a strange one. We'll drag it in anyway. Okay, so check all your trees and make sure they have colliders. Now we can go back to the terrain. Back to our test terrain. Don't need that. So let's have a look at our terrain now. We have some trees on there already which don't have colliders, so we need to get rid of them. So let's set our brush size to maximum. And while holding the shift, paint the terrain again, and you see those trees are being removed. Now if you do it that way like I've just done, make sure you zoom in, have a good look around, see if there's no trees left. Just say for example, we did have some trees left. Okay. First of all, I'm going to bring in the trees. There we go, just removing the trees will remove the trees. I'm going to bring in the trees that we created with colliders. Oh, we added colliders to these trees we created. So there we go. There's the 3 trees that we added colliders to. Now let's do the same thing. Go terrain, mass place trees. 5,000 was quite a large enough number. Place. Now we see we have a scattering of all those tree types. Let's just hit play and see what happens now. So we look around our scene, we see lots of trees. Let's walk up to a tree. Not fall off the slope. And I've collided with a tree. Here's another tree, different type of tree. Now I'm colliding with trees. Okay, here's another tree. Bang. So there we have it. If you're having problems with colliding with trees, almost certainly the problem is that your tree prefab or tree model does not come with a collider. You have to manually add your own collider, make that tree as a new prefab, and then use your collider prefab when you are placing your trees. And there you go. You no longer have a problem with colliding with trees. Okay, so there's trees. Now it's probably gone on for a while, so let's quickly try and get on to the last one. More definition objects. Let's add some grass. So looking at the terrain assets we imported, we've got some grasses we can add. Some ferns. Add some standard grass. And some weeds for contrast. Now grass really is a very sensitive and delicate thing. Okay? So if you want to add grass, you're better off working in small areas. So we'll even pick one of these paint brushes. Turn the brush size right down low. You bring the opacity down to halfway and the target strength. Now to see the grass, you quite often have to zoom in also. So we picked on the fern, paint that, and we can see some ferns coming in. Now watch as I zoom out. See, very quickly that has disappeared. So if you sit back here like we have with most other things, and you grab a very big brush, and you start painting the terrain. But it doesn't look like there's any grass. Well, it did in this view, but from the edit view, from the scene view, it doesn't look like grass is being added. Now I've done a few clicks. Now what if we zoom in now? Look, all this has been added. So you see, grass will add, and it's very quick to add and very thick. So you've got to be very careful when adding grass. If you do it from a distance, you'll have no idea what's happening. You see, that is incredibly thick. So the same principle, if we hold the shift while we paint, we're actually deleting. As I said, there's all this grass. Just I can't see. So really, making terrains in full is very painstaking. You know, it's very artistic. You take your time with it. and get it looking just right, but especially with grass, being so sensitive. Alright? You have to be very careful with the way you apply your grass. There we go. See, even zooming right in, it's only there I can see these blades of grass. So you might just look, they're gone. It's very easy to deceive yourself and paint and paint and paint. Then if you come in, you'll see, wow, I've actually covered this thing with grass. There you go. Alright.